Before we begin, if you're new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Let's see how far this story reaches. I'll be reading every single one. The war party found her at dusk, kneeling in the shadow of the ancient thornwood where the mist rose from the moss like breath from something dying. She didn't hear them coming. Her entire world had narrowed to the small white shape cradled against her chest. So still, so fragile, so impossibly precious for something that wasn't hers. Shirley Rowland didn't move when the circle of armored wolves closed around her. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't run. Her eyes, those soft, grief-worn eyes that had learned to expect nothing from the world, stayed fixed on the tiny bundle of snow-white fur bleeding slowly into her dark dress. Step away from the cub. The voice that spoke was not a warrior's command. It was something older, something that didn't ask. It simply declared, and the declaration rearranged the air around it. It belonged to Alpha King Aaron Gardner, ruler of the Ironvale territories and the most feared wolf in 4 kingdoms. He stood at the center of the circle, a wall of battle-scarred armor and barely leashed power, his golden crown catching the last red light of dying day like a brand. His eyes had already shifted, dark gold gone molten. His wolf so close to the surface that the very trees seemed to lean away from him. The dagger in his hand, ancient ironwood handle worn smooth by generations of kings, the blade that had never been raised without drawing blood, was leveled at her throat. Shirley's response did not come immediately. She pressed her lips once, softly, to the top of the cub's small head. Then she looked up. "He needs a healer," she said. "Now." The warriors exchanged glances across the misty clearing. They could smell everything. The blood, too much of it, soaked dark into her dress, matted into snow-white fur. The hollow wolf musk on her skin and hands, the unmistakable reek of a fight she'd had no business surviving. And beneath all of it, the scent of something that made every wolf in the circle go still without knowing why. Grief, pure and absolute, coming from the broken Luna. "She's holding the prince." Aaron's beta Darien stepped forward, his voice dropping to something surgical and cold. "She's broken, rejected, packless by disgrace, found in restricted thornwood territory with the royal heir bleeding in her arms." His eyes swept her with contempt. "My king, the answer here is simple." "No." Shirley's voice cracked on the single word. Not from fear, but from something rawer than fear. She finally raised her full gaze to Aaron's, and what the warriors saw in her expression made several of them take an involuntary step back. She was not afraid of the dagger. She was not afraid of the crown. She was not even afraid of Darien's verdict, which was already written in his face. She was afraid of something far worse. She was afraid the cub would die before she could make him feel that someone loved him. The image is exact. Shirley's rose-dark hair falling loose around a face tracked with silent tears, her lips pressed to the small white forehead of a prince she'd never met, while behind her in the mist, armored and immovable, Aaron Gardner stands with a dagger he is no longer certain he can raise. His crown catches the dying light. His wolf is utterly, inexplicably still. The most feared predator in 4 kingdoms, rendered motionless by a broken woman who is more concerned with a dying child than with the blade at her throat. The central dramatic irony establishes itself before a single explanation is given. The woman this world called broken is the only one in this clearing whole enough to love. They had been searching for 6 hours. Shirley could see it in them, the particular exhaustion of men who had been running on fear rather than strength. The way the warriors' hands gripped their weapons too tightly, the way even Darien's controlled composure had begun to fray at the edges into something raw. 6 hours of hunting through thornwood territory calling a name that didn't answer. 6 hours of finding nothing but silence and mist and the growing certainty that silence meant the worst. And then they had found her instead. Darien recovered first. He always would. That was the particular skill of a beta who had survived 3 wars and 2 kings. He looked at Shirley Rowland, took precise inventory of everything she was and everything she represented, and reached his conclusion in the space of a single breath. Execute her. The words fell into the clearing like stones into still water. Several warriors moved immediately, closing the circle tighter, weapons rising. Shirley didn't flinch. She had heard those words before in different mouths about different offenses. The world had been trying to erase her for 2 years. It hadn't managed it yet. She's broken, Darian continued, his voice carrying the measured certainty of a man presenting irrefutable evidence. Rejected by Alpha Conran of the Westfall Pack. Stripped of her Luna title by council decree. Packless by disgrace and documented record. He gestured at her with something that wasn't quite contempt. It was colder than contempt, more administrative. Found in restricted Ironvale Thornwood territory without permission or escort. In possession of the bleeding royal heir. The law is clear, my king. The answer is simple. Aaron had not spoken. He had not moved. His dagger remained level. His crown caught the last ember of dying daylight, and his eyes, dark gold, hammered flat by 5 years of ruling without softness, stayed fixed on Shirley with an expression she couldn't name and didn't try to. She spoke into the silence before it could be filled with swords. I found him at the base of the Greywood Oak. Her voice was quiet, factual. She had learned long ago that pleading accomplished nothing in rooms where the verdict had already been decided, and this clearing was simply a room without walls. 200 yards east of the Ironvale boundary marker. He was alone. The hollow wolves had already been at him. Hollow wolves don't cross the boundary markers, one of the warriors said. They do when they're following something that smells like blood. She shifted cadence slightly, carefully, ensuring his head stayed supported. He made a sound, barely a sound, more a breath with shape to it, and her grip tightened. He was running from them. He must have shifted to outpace them and couldn't find his way back. He was lost before they caught him. You expect us to believe. Look at my hands. The clearing went quiet. Shirley raised her right hand, the one not cradling Caden's head, and held it open and level where every warrior could see. The hollow wolf claw marks were unmistakable to anyone who had ever fought one. The particular raking pattern, 3 lines dragged deep, the edges already purpling where the toxin in their claws had begun its slow work on her skin. Her forearm bore 3 more. A long gash crossed her collarbone where she hadn't been fast enough. I fought 4 of them off. She set her hand back beneath Caden. The branch beside my left foot has their blood on it, not mine. I've been walking for 3 hours in the direction of your keep. Not away from it. Not toward the Westfall border. Not toward any settlement that would shelter me. Not toward any road that leads somewhere safer for a broken Luna carrying a royal pup through enemy territory. She paused. Let that sit. I walked toward you. Because he needed a healer and your keep has one. No one spoke. Darian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at the branch. He looked at her hands. He looked at the direction she had been walking when they found her, which was, and this was a fact that could not be argued away, directly toward Ironvale. It changes nothing, he said. But the administrative certainty had developed a hairline fracture. The law doesn't account for. Darian. One word. From Aaron. Darian stopped. The Alpha King of Ironvale stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Shirley with slow, deliberate strides that made every warrior in the circle instinctively step back to give him room. He stopped 2 feet from her. This close, he was enormous. Not merely tall but constructed entirely for dominance. Every line of him engineered by generations of alpha blood to communicate a single message. Nothing survives my displeasure. He looked down at her open hands, at the branch, at the path she had been walking. Then he looked at his son's face, so small against the dark fabric of her dress, so terribly white, the silver markings in his fur catching the mistlight in ways that made Aaron's throat move. Shirley met his gaze and did not look away. She did not ask for mercy. She did not ask for anything. She simply looked at him with those grief-dark eyes and waited for him to decide what kind of king he was going to be. The dagger lowered 1 inch. Aaron said nothing, but it lowered. The healer's name was Oswin. He was old enough to have served 2 kings before Aaron, steady-handed and unsentimental, a man who had delivered verdicts on battlefields that broke younger men where they stood. He examined Caden for 4 minutes without speaking. Then he sat back on his heels in the moss and folded his hands in his lap, and the gesture alone told every warrior in the clearing everything they needed to know before he opened his mouth. "Hollow wolf venom," he said. "Deep in the bloodstream. The lymph nodes are already responding." He paused. "He has minutes, perhaps less. There is nothing I can give him that will reach him faster than what is already there." The clearing went so still that Shirley could hear the mist moving through the upper branches. She heard a sound from Aaron. Not a word, not quite. Something that lived below language, something that came from the place in a person where all the armoring ends. She didn't look at him. She looked at Caden, whose breathing had changed in the last 10 minutes into something shallow and irregular, like a candle flame in a room where someone had opened a window. Oswin began to rise. Shirley stayed exactly where she was. Darian stepped forward. "We should bring him inside the—" "No." The word came out of her quietly but with a completeness that stopped him. "Moving him will hurt him. He's not in pain right now." She stroked one careful hand along Caden's side, the snow-white fur matted and damp but still impossibly soft beneath her fingers. "Let him stay still. Let him stay warm." Another silence. Then, with the particular sound of a man who has run out of objections and knows it, Darian stepped back. No one told her to move. No one raised a weapon. The circle of warriors simply stood, and the thornwood held its ancient breath around them. And Shirley Rowland settled herself more firmly in the moss and held the dying Prince of Ironvale like she had been made for exactly this. She began to hum. It was barely sound at first. More a vibration than a melody. Something that rose from her chest without her deciding to produce it. A reflex. The same instinct that had made her reach for him in the first place. That had made her fight 4 hollow wolves with a branch rather than run. Her body knew what to do with a frightened creature even when her mind was fractured with grief. She stroked his fur and hummed and kept her heartbeat deliberately slow, because small things took their rhythm from whoever held them, and she wanted his last rhythm to be peaceful. Caden's eyes opened. They were pale gold. She had noticed this before, but now, in the failing light, they caught something luminous and distant, already half-turned towards somewhere she couldn't follow. He looked at her face with the dim, wondering focus of the very young and the very close to gone. His mouth moved. The words came in the ancient tongue, the language underneath language, the one all wolves carried in their blood regardless of pack or territory or designation, the one that needed no teaching because it was older than teaching. "Is my papa coming?" Shirley's throat closed. She breathed through it, opened it again. "He's here," she whispered, in the same ancient tongue, the words rising in her with the ease of something she had always known. "He sees you. He loves you more than kingdoms." Caden's gaze drifted, then returned to her face. Something in him settled, some last held tension releasing, like a fist slowly opening. "You smell like the garden," he murmured. "The one Mama grows." "I know," she said, though she didn't. "Rest now, little one." She bent her head and pressed her lips to his forehead. The Luna farewell was not merely a gesture. Every wolf knew this in their bones, even if they had never seen it performed. It was ancient, it was irreversible, it was the oldest thing a Luna could give. The formal release, the blessing of passage, the promise that the one departing did not go alone or unloved into whatever waited beyond the forest's edge. It required a Luna. It required love. It required both, freely given. Shirley had neither title nor pack. She had only the second. It was enough. The Thornwood knew it. The warriors knew it. The air changed when her lips touched his forehead, the way air changes before rain. A pressure shift, a held breath released across the whole clearing. Then she sang. The lullaby of returning had no composer. It predated every pack record, every royal lineage, every war that had ever divided these territories. It was simply there, in the oldest part of every wolf's memory, the way certain songs live in the body rather than the mind. She sang it softly, without performance, the melody rising and falling in the mist like something the thornwood itself had been waiting to hear again. Aaron Gardner had not moved in 4 minutes. Now something happened to his face that none of his warriors had ever seen and would spend years afterward struggling to describe. It was not grief exactly. Grief was something he had locked away 5 years ago in a room inside himself and swallowed the key. This was the door coming off its hinges anyway. He knew this song. His mother had sung it. Her mother before her. The last time it had moved through Ironvale air was the night his Luna died, giving Caden life, and he had heard it through a wall, distantly, too late, and had never permitted himself to think of it again. He was thinking of it now. Caden's chest rose once more. Slowly. Completely. The pale gold eyes drifted closed with something on his face that was very nearly peace. Then stillness. The crown of Ironvale, forged from the bones of 7 conquered kings, worn through battle and ceremony and 5 years of ruling without softness, slipped from Aaron Gardner's bowed head and struck the forest floor with a sound like a final word. He did not reach for it. Nobody moved to pick up the crown. It lay in the moss where it had fallen, catching no light now, looking smaller than a crown of conquered kings had any right to look. The warriors stared at it the way men stare at something that has rewritten the rules of the world they thought they understood. None of them reached for it. None of them spoke. The thornwood held its silence around them like a held breath that had forgotten how to release. Shirley was still humming. She hadn't decided to continue. She wasn't certain she could stop. The melody had rooted itself somewhere below conscious thought and kept moving through her the way grief moves. Not because you choose it, but because stopping it would require an effort the body cannot locate. Her hand was still moving in slow strokes along Caden's fur, though she knew now that he couldn't feel it, because some gestures are for the one who gives them rather than the one who receives. She was so tired, the kind of tired that lives in the bones rather than the muscles, that no amount of sleep reaches entirely. 3 hours of carrying him. The fight before that, 4 hollow wolves and a branch, and the particular desperate strength that appears in a body only when there is no alternative. The weight of knowing, from the moment she found him, that she was probably walking toward her own execution and choosing to walk anyway. She became aware of movement beside her. Slowly, carefully, the way a very large thing moves when it is trying not to disturb something fragile. She registered the presence before she understood it. The warmth of a body lowering itself into the moss to her left, the sound of armor settling, the smell of iron and pine resin, and something underneath that her wolf recognized before she did. Aaron Gardner was kneeling, not standing over her, not looming with the particular geometry of dominance his entire body had been constructed to project. Kneeling in the cold thornwood moss, his crown still lying 3 feet away where it had fallen, his dark gold eyes level with hers. She met his gaze and found something there she hadn't expected and didn't know how to categorize. Not softness exactly. Something more structural than softness. The look of a wall that has understood, for the first time, that it was built in the wrong place. He looked at her hands first. The claw marks, the bruising already deepening around the edges, the dried blood that wasn't Caden's. He looked at the gash on her collarbone. He looked at the utter depletion in her face, the way she was still holding herself upright by something that wasn't physical strength anymore. Then he reached out, slowly, and gathered Caden into his arms. She let him go. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had organized around the weight of him until the weight was gone, and something in her chest listed sideways without it. She pressed her empty hands together in her lap and kept her breathing even and watched Aaron hold his son with a gentleness that seemed to cost him something, as though the muscles required for it had been unused so long they had to be found again from memory. He stayed like that for a long moment, his head bowed, the thornwood quiet around them. When he looked up at her, His voice had changed. The declarative precision of a king was still there underneath, but something else was in front of it now, raw-edged and unguarded. You fought hollow wolves for him, he said. With your hands. She said nothing. It wasn't a question. You carried him for hours through territory that would have killed you if any rogue patrol had found you. A pause. His throat moved. You sang him what I couldn't. His voice broke on the last word, once cleanly like a green branch under too much weight, and he didn't try to recover it or cover it or transform it into something more controlled. He simply let it break. You gave him the only thing I couldn't reach him in time to give. His eyes held hers. You made him feel loved. Shirley said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because she trusted this silence more than she trusted the words she might put into it. Aaron steadied himself. When he spoke again, the rawness was still there, but behind it had appeared something that carried the weight of absolute authority. Not the authority of rank, but the older kind, the kind that comes from a person who has decided something irrevocably and is simply announcing it to the world. In my territory, he said, this makes you protected. In my pack, this makes you honored. He stopped. Something shifted in his face. Something private and precise. The closing of a calculation that had been running behind his eyes since the moment he saw her bend over his son. And in my memory, he stopped again. Swallowed. Finished quietly. This makes you irreplaceable. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Then, from Shirley's left, the sound of metal meeting earth. She turned to find the nearest warrior had lowered his sword. Not dropped it, not sheathed it. Lowered it deliberately, point down, both hands wrapped around the hilt, head bowed over it. The posture was unmistakable to every wolf in the clearing. Not surrender. Salute. The next warrior followed. Then another, working around the circle in a slow, unorchestrated wave until every weapon in the thornwood clearing was pointed at the ground and every head was bowed, and the only sound was the mist moving through the ancient trees overhead. Shirley sat in the moss with her empty, wounded hands in her lap, and for the first time in 2 years, the world was not asking her to leave. The walk back took 40 minutes. Felt longer. Aaron carried Caden himself. He refused every offer with a look rather than words. The particular silence of a man who has decided that this weight belongs to him and will not be distributed. He walked at the front of the formation, his crown still lying in the thornwood moss where it had fallen. No one had retrieved it, and no one had suggested they should, and the war party fell into step around him with the instinctive, wordless precision of men who understood that something had changed and were still calculating exactly what. Shirley walked beside him. Not behind, where a packless woman in Ironvale territory would ordinarily have been positioned. Not under guard, bracketed by warriors with weapons ready. Beside him, at his left, in the place traditionally occupied by a king's second. She wasn't certain how it had happened, whether Aaron had placed her there deliberately or whether the formation had simply arranged itself around the fact of her, the way water arranges itself around stone. She only knew that when she had hesitated at the tree-lean, uncertain of her position, his hand had come to her elbow briefly, just a graze, just a steadying, and she had walked through. The thornwood thinned. The stone road appeared. And with the stone road came the first torches of Ironvale keep rising against the darkening sky, and with the torches came the wolves. Word had traveled the way bad news always travels in a pack. Faster than feet, faster than runners, faster than any rational explanation. By the time the war party reached the outer gates, the path was already lined. Hundreds of wolves in the stone corridors and along the ramparts and crowded into the archways, silent and still, watching their king come home without his crown and with his son's body against his chest. The quiet was total, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses against the ears like deep water. Then the whispers began. Shirley heard them the way you hear weather moving in at the edges first, then surrounding. She kept her eyes forward and her breathing even and let them come. She's broken. The word moved through the crowd like a stone skipped across water, each ripple touching the next. The Westfall rejection. Stripped of her title. Packless by council decree. Why is she walking beside him? Why is his hand on her arm? What is she doing inside our gates? What does it mean that she's here? She had heard versions of these words for 2 years. In markets that went quiet when she entered. In settlements that offered her work but not welcome. In the eyes of every wolf who recognized her face and then looked quickly away, as though disgrace were a thing that could be caught. She had learned to let the words move through her rather than into her, to stand in the current of them and remain upright. She remained upright now. But then something shifted in the crowd. She felt it before she understood it. A change in the quality of the silence, a stillness that was different from the stillness of judgment. She became aware that people were looking not at her but at Aaron, and what they saw in his face was doing something to the whispers. She glanced at him. His expression was not the controlled, declarative composure of the Alpha King of Ironvale. It was not armored or strategic or arranged for effect. It was simply a man's face, carrying what a man's face looks like when he is holding his dead child through a stone corridor, and the grief on it was so unguarded and so total that the wolves lining the walls went quiet in the way people go quiet when they witness something sacred. The whispers didn't stop because they'd been silenced. They stopped because the sight of Aaron Gardner's undisguised face made them feel suddenly very small and very wrong. He brought Caden to the royal chambers. He laid him on the bed he had slept in every night for 5 years, tucked the coverlet around him with the same careful hands that had carried him home, and stood for a long moment in the doorway afterward in silence. Then he turned and walked to the great hall, and Shirley followed, because no one had told her not to. Darian was waiting. He had composed himself on the walk back into something precise and functional. The professional grief of a beta who understands that mourning is a thing to be done privately and governance is a thing to be done immediately. He drew Aaron aside near the far wall, away from the attendants and the warriors still filing in from the courtyard, and his voice was low and unhurried and surgical. The council will convene by morning. They already know she's here. Elders Voss and Calder have sent word requesting an immediate hearing on the matter of her presence inside the keep. He paused. The records of rejection will be entered as evidence. Her former alpha may be contacted. The political exposure, my king, is significant. She is broken. Whatever she did in the Thornwood, that record does not change and the council will. Darian. Aaron had not turned around. She sang my son into the next life. 7 words. Flat and final and carrying the specific weight of a door being closed from the inside. He walked away. The conversation was over. We have reached half of the story. Please subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. And hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. That's the only way you can help our channel to grow. The Eastern Garden had been his Luna's. Shirley hadn't known this when she found it on the 2nd day. She had simply followed the overgrowth to its source, the way neglected things draw her, and discovered a walled space behind the keep's oldest wing where the stone benches had gone green with moss and the climbing roses had given up climbing and simply sprawled, unpruned and magnificent, across everything they could reach. No one came here. She could tell by the quality of the silence, the undisturbed way the weeds had colonized the path, the absence of any footprint in the soft earth beside the central bed. She had come back every morning since. It was the only place inside Ironvale's walls that didn't watch her. For days after Caden's funeral rites, she came to pack. She had very little. This had been true for 2 years, and she had made a practice of traveling light. 1 change of clothes, a small knife, the leather cord she used to tie back her hair, a folded piece of paper that had been her Luna documentation before the council stamped it void. She kept it anyway. She was not entirely certain why. Perhaps because even a cancelled thing had once been real. She sat on the moss-covered bench and folded everything into her carry cloth and rehearsed the words she would say to whoever she encountered on her way out of the gates. Something quiet. Something that didn't ask for anything. Thank you for the room. Thank you for the meals. I'll go now before the council makes it complicated. I'm sorry for whatever disruption my presence caused. She had become very good at exits that apologized for themselves. She didn't hear him arrive. He sat down beside her on the bench. Not across from her, not at a commanding distance, but beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth of him before she registered the fact of him. And when she turned, he was already there. No crown. No armor. A plain dark tunic, boots that had actually walked in rather than been placed by an attendant. The particular unguarded look of a man who has spent 4 days in the machinery of grief and state ceremony and has come outside to be something simpler for a while. He looked at the folded carry cloth in her hands. "You're leaving," he said. "I didn't want to do it without," she began. "I didn't ask you to." The garden settled around them. A rose branch moved against the stone wall in a breath of wind, loose and unhurried. Shirley looked at her hands, at the carry cloth, at the void documentation folded inside it. "The council convenes tomorrow," she said. "Darian told me this morning, though I expect he thought he was telling someone who didn't need to know." She kept her voice level, factual, the same register she had used in the Thornwood clearing, presenting evidence without appeal. "Elder Voss has already sent to Westfall for my former Alpha's testimony. The records of rejection will be entered formally. Whatever standing I have here, whatever you declared in the Thornwood, it will be challenged, and the challenge will be ugly, and I will be the thing they use against you." She paused. "I'm not packless by nature. I know how councils work. I know what a broken Luna in a king's keep looks like from the outside, and I know what it costs the king." She pressed the carry cloth between her palms. "You have enough to carry. I won't be another weight." Aaron said nothing. He let her finish. He sat in the overgrown garden in his plain clothes and listened to every word with the particular quality of attention that doesn't plan its response while the other person is still speaking, that simply receives. She had not encountered this quality often. It unsettled her more than interruption would have. When she stopped, the garden was quiet. "Are you finished?" he said. Before she could answer, he reached across the space between them and lifted the carry cloth from her hands. Not roughly, not with any quality of command, simply with the calm certainty of a man removing an object that belongs somewhere else, setting it on the bench to her other side, out of her reach. Then he turned back to her. "You walked into the Thornwood alone," he said. "You came out carrying my son. You fought 4 hollow wolves with a branch." His eyes held hers steadily. "You sang the lullaby my mother sang. The one I haven't heard since the night Caden was born and his mother wasn't there in the morning." Something moved across his face at that brief, controlled "but there." "You have hollow wolf blood still healing in the lines of your palms." He glanced at her hands, then back. "And you're worried about my counsel." She opened her mouth. Something shifted in his eyes. Behind the dark gold, beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the 5 years of ruling without softness. Something that had been pressing against a wall finally pressed too hard, and the wall moved. Just slightly, just enough. His wolf knew her. It had known her since the Thornwood clearing, since she had looked up at him through rose-dark hair with his dying son in her arms and felt no fear. It had no name for what she was yet. He was not ready to give it one. He only said, "Stay." "Not because I command it, because I'm asking." Shirley looked at him for a long time, at this man without his crown, in a dead woman's garden, asking instead of declaring, at the carefully held grief in his face and the something else beneath it that she didn't yet have words for either. She reached across and took the carry cloth back from the bench beside her. Then she set it down on the ground at her feet and left it there. The council chamber was in the oldest part of the keep, where the stone walls were thick enough to swallow sound and the narrow windows let in light only at specific hours, as though the architects had understood that certain conversations required a particular quality of shadow. Shirley knew this because Darian had told her, with the flat courtesy of a man discharging an obligation he resented, that she was to wait in the anteroom adjoining it. Not inside, not gone. In the specific purgatory of the almost included, close enough to be summoned, far enough to be reminded of her position. She sat on the wooden bench outside the chamber doors and listened to the muffled architecture of her own dismantling. She couldn't hear words through the stone, only rhythms. The measured cadence of Elder Voss, who she had been told was 73 years old and had survived 4 Alpha Kings by being structurally unmovable. The sharper intervals of Elder Calder, who favored precision over volume. Darian's voice underneath both of them, the quiet surgical register she recognized from the Thornwood clearing, building its case the way good betas built all cases. Slowly, without apparent effort, brick by brick until the weight of it was inescapable. She folded her hands in her lap and kept her breathing even and waited. She was practiced at waiting in rooms adjacent to decisions being made about her. Her former Alpha's council had done the same thing, seated her outside while they voted on the terms of her rejection, on the formal revocation of her title, on the specific language of the public announcement that would follow her out of Westfall territory and into every pack record in 4 kingdoms. She had sat on a bench very like this one and listened to rhythms she couldn't decode and emerged afterward into a world that had been rearranged without her input. She understood, sitting here now, that this was simply the shape her life took. Rooms deliberating her fate, benches, waiting, the particular specific loneliness of being a subject rather than a participant in your own story. What she did not expect was what happened inside the chamber. She learned of it later, in pieces, from sources she hadn't anticipated. This was what she was told. Elder Voss had opened by entering the records of rejection into formal evidence. The full documentation, her former Alpha's signed dismissal, the council decree stripping her Luna title, the public announcement. He had laid them on the table with the satisfied precision of a man producing an argument he considers unanswerable. Elder Calder had followed by citing 3 historical precedents in which broken lunas had been found in proximity to royal households, and the results, in all 3 cases, had been destabilizing. A broken luna near a crown was an omen, a structural incompatibility, a liability that no amount of sentiment about Thornwood clearings could reasonably offset. Darian had said nothing yet. He was waiting the way good strategists wait, for the architecture to be complete before he added the final weight. And then, from the back of the chamber, one of the Thornwood warriors stood up. His name was Aldrich. He was 26 years old and had served in Aaron's war party for 3 years, and he had not been invited to speak and did not appear to require an invitation. He stood and he said simply what he had seen, the hollow wolf marks on her hands, the branch, the direction she had been walking. The way she had held Caden for 3 hours through hostile territory without putting him down once. Not when her arms must have been failing. Not when the hollow wolves had pressed her against the greywood oak and she had fought them with nothing but the branch and her body between them and the pup. He sat down. A second warrior stood. Then a third. They were not coordinated. They had not discussed this beforehand or planned their testimony or been directed by Aaron, who was not in the chamber at all, who had removed himself on the advice of precedent that said a king should not be present when council deliberated matters concerning his household. They stood one by one because each one who stood made it possible for the next to stand, and they said what they had seen, and what they had seen was irrefutable because all of them had seen the same thing from different angles and the account did not change. The chamber had gone very quiet by the time the 4th warrior finished. Shirley knew none of this yet. She was in the corridor outside, having stood from the bench to move her stiffening legs, walking the slow circuit of the anteroom she had already walked twice, when she became aware of a small presence at the edge of her vision. A child. A boy, perhaps 6 years old, with the dark eyes common to Ironvale wolves and a serious expression that suggested he had thought carefully about this approach. He was holding something, a wildflower pulled from somewhere, slightly crushed from being carried in a determined fist. He held it out to her. She took it, kneeling to his level, and waited. "My mama says you sang the old song," he said. His voice was very careful, the way children's voices are when they are delivering something they understand to be important. "The one for going home." Shirley looked at him, at the flower in her hand, at his small serious face. "Yes," she said. "I did." He nodded, as though this confirmed something he had needed confirmed, and then turned and walked away down the corridor with the gravity of a completed errand. Shirley stayed kneeling on the stone floor for a moment after he had gone, the crushed wildflower held in both hands. Then she stood and straightened, and pressed her back against the cold wall, and let herself cry, quietly, briefly, with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has learned to grieve only in the spaces where no one is watching. By the time the chamber doors opened, she was composed again. Hands folded, back straight, face arranged into the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to expect nothing. What came through the doors was something other than nothing. But she didn't know that yet. The first time it happened, she told herself it was coincidence. She had wandered into the eastern garden near dusk because the servants' quarters grew loud in the evenings, laughter and clatter and the smell of someone's supper, and she had not yet learned how to sit inside noise without flinching. The eastern garden was the only part of the palace grounds that had been allowed to go wild. Ivy had consumed most of the stone wall along the far edge. Jasmine crawled wherever it pleased. There were no gardeners assigned to it, no lanterns, no particular reason for anyone of importance to walk there, which was why she startled when she heard his footsteps. Aaron said nothing when he found her on the broken bench near the old fountain. He simply looked at her, then at the overgrown Jasmine, then sat down on the low wall nearby like a man who had nowhere else to be. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. When he left, he didn't say goodnight. She didn't expect him to. The second time, she arrived to find him already there. After that, neither of them pretended. He came to her the way a man comes to the only warm room left in a cold house. Not announcing himself, not explaining, simply arriving. And she learned quickly that what he needed was not comfort, not ceremony, but this. Someone who had been there. Someone who had heard Caden's voice when Aaron could not. He was obsessed with white moths, Aaron said one evening, turning something small over in his hands. A carved wooden figure worn smooth. Couldn't explain it. Other children wanted dogs, horses. Caden would chase moths across the courtyard for an hour and call it the greatest thing he'd ever done. Shirley was quiet for a moment. He told me about the moths in the thornwood. He said they looked like pieces of cloud that had gotten lost. Aaron went very still. He used to say things like that, he said finally, his voice low. Things that didn't sound like they came from a child. I never knew where he got them. A pause. He couldn't say his R's yet. Did you? Did he talk much? Constantly, she said, and meant it warmly. He talked the whole time. I think he was trying not to be afraid, so he just kept talking. Something moved across Aaron's face that she couldn't name. Not quite a smile. Something older and more broken than a smile. He used to fall asleep on my chest, Aaron said. Every night for 5 years. Even when he was too big for it, really. I'd sit up with him until he went under and then I'd just stay. Because I didn't want to move and wake him. He looked down at the carved figure. I didn't know that was a thing I'd miss. You don't know which moments are the last ones. She didn't try to fill that silence. She had learned that some silences weren't empty. After a while, he looked at her. What did he say? At the end. She had known this question was coming. She had been carrying the answer for weeks, holding it carefully, the way you carry something that belongs to someone else. He asked if you were coming, she said. He kept asking. So I told him you were there. I told him you loved him more than kingdoms. Aaron looked away. The muscle in his jaw moved once. Was that true? He asked quietly. When you said it, did you believe it? Shirley considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I didn't know you yet, she said honestly. I knew nothing about you except that your son asked for you with his last breath. But it felt true. It felt like the only thing that mattered, that he hear it. She paused. I needed it to be true, so I said it like it was. I don't know if that was right. It was right, Aaron said. His voice had gone rough at the edges. Whatever I am or am not, that part was always true. The garden was very still around them. Somewhere far off, A night bird called once and went quiet. Aaron reached across the space between them slowly, without hurry, as though giving her every chance to pull away. He took her damaged hand in both of his, the one that had been burned in the thornwood, the one that had never quite healed right, the one she had learned to keep turned slightly inward so others wouldn't stare. He held it the way you hold something precious, something that has already been through fire. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He just held on. And Shirley, who had spent her whole life making herself smaller, making herself quieter, making herself easier to overlook, sat perfectly still and let herself be held. She didn't know what this was yet. She wasn't sure he did either. But the jasmine was blooming in the dark around them, and neither of them moved for a very long time. She didn't know it was happening until it was already begun. Aaron had come to her door that morning before the household was fully awake, while the corridors still held the gray quiet of early light. He didn't explain. He only said, "Walk with me to the morning meal," and looked at her in a way that made argument feel beside the point. She had smoothed her dress with both hands, tucked her damaged one slightly behind her wrist out of habit, and followed him. She realized what was happening when they reached the entrance to the great hall, and she heard the sound. The full, living sound of the entire pack assembled, voices and movement and the scrape of benches, the kind of noise that meant everyone was present. Her steps slowed without her meaning them to. Aaron paused beside her. He didn't reach for her. He just waited. "You could have warned me," she said quietly. "You would have argued," he said. She couldn't disagree with that. He walked in first, and she walked beside him, and the hall went quiet the way a held breath goes quiet. Not sudden, but complete, until the only sound was the fire in the long hearth and the soft fall of their footsteps across stone. She felt every eye in the room find her at once. She felt the old reflex rise up in her chest, that trained and practiced instinct to shrink, to angle herself sideways, to become easier to overlook. She kept walking. Aaron stopped at the head of the room. He didn't climb to the dais. He didn't call for attention or wait for a herald. He simply stood where he was, in front of his people, and spoke. His voice carried the way a king's voice carries, not because it was loud, but because the room knew to listen. "I have not called you here for ceremony," he said. "There will be no formal assembly, no council proceeding. I want no theater this morning." He let that settle. "I want only to say something true in front of the people I am responsible for, because truth spoken in private is only a feeling. Truth spoken in front of witnesses becomes a foundation." No one moved. He turned, then not toward the room but toward her. And what he said next he said as though the great hall with all its watching eyes had simply ceased to exist and there were only the two of them. "She is the woman who held my son's hand in the dark when I could not reach him. She is the woman who told him he was loved when I had no voice left to say it." His jaw was steady, but she could see what it cost him to hold it so. "She is not what she was made to believe she is. She is not a maid, not a servant, not a girl small enough to fit into the corners others have left her. She is the woman who taught me that a crown is only metal until love decides what it means." Somewhere in the hall, she heard the sound of someone exhaling. "She has been broken in front of me," Aaron continued. "She would tell you she hasn't. She would say she's fine. She's managed. She's nothing worth making a fuss over. But I have sat beside her in the dark and I know the shape of what she carries. A beat. She is not broken. She has never been broken. She was simply waiting for a kingdom worthy of her." Shirley Rowland, who had not cried once in the thornwood, who had not cried when they burned her hand or when they turned her out or when she arrived at a palace gate with nowhere else to go, felt her vision blur at the edges and blinked it back through sheer and furious will. Aaron took one step toward her. Just one. "I am asking," he said, and the word landed differently than anything else he'd spoken, softer and more careful, stripped of every royal layer until it was only a man standing in front of a woman. "Not commanding. I am choosing, not claiming. I have chosen you, and I am asking, will you stay?" The hall waited. She had spent years perfecting the art of being small. She knew every technique: the downcast eye, the half-step back, the deflecting word that moved attention elsewhere before it could settle on her too long. She knew how to disappear inside a room full of people. She had made it a survival skill. She stood completely still. She let them look. Let the weight of every eye in that great hall rest on her without flinching away from it, without turning her damaged hand inward, without finding something on the floor to study. She stood in the middle of all that witness, and she breathed through it, and she did not disappear. Then she lifted her eyes to his. "Yes," she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In a hall that quiet, a single word was more than enough to fill every corner, climb every stone wall, and settle into the rafters like something that intended to stay. Yes, like she'd always known the answer, like she'd only been waiting for someone to finally ask. 6 months is long enough to forget, sometimes, that you were ever anyone else. Shirley woke to gold. It came through the tall windows in long, unhurried bars, the kind of morning light that had no urgency in it, no demand. The room was 3 times the size of everything she had ever called shelter. She had stopped being startled by this, mostly, though occasionally she still woke in the first gray moment before full consciousness and felt the old animal panic of not knowing where she was. Then the light came, and Aaron's warmth beside her, and she remembered. He was already awake. He almost always was. She had learned that he slept lightly and rose early, that he had done so since Caden, that the dark hours were harder for him than he would ever say aloud. But he had stopped leaving the room before dawn. He stayed now, and she had never asked him to, and he had never explained. Some things between them needed no language. He was watching her when she turned. Those dark gold eyes, which had once been unreadable as a winter sky, had learned, slowly, imperfectly, the way real things are learned, to be warm. "You were smiling in your sleep," he said. "I don't do that." "You do now." Through the wide window, the sounds of the pack rose in the morning air. She could hear pups in the courtyard, their voices bright and shapeless with play. The elders would already be in the memorial garden, tending it in that careful and devoted way they had taken to since the white moth sculpture was placed there. Pale stone wings caught mid-flight above a small granite marker, Caden's name cut clean and deep. It had been the elder Mara's idea, and Aaron had gone very quiet when she proposed it, and then nodded once, and that had been enough. The thornwood was Aaron's idea. He asked her at midday while they were walking the northern wall casually, the way he sometimes said the most significant things, as though testing whether the air could hold them. "Come with me tonight, back to the clearing." She knew which clearing without asking. They went at dusk, just the two of them, no guard, no escort. The forest received them the way it always did, with that dense and breathing quiet, that sense of something ancient paying attention. She had walked this path in terror once, in the dark, with a child's hand in hers. She walked it now differently, not without feeling, but with more room inside herself to carry the feeling without being undone by it. The clearing looked smaller than she remembered, the way places from the worst moments of your life always shrink when you return to them. The moss had grown back completely over the impression where the crown had fallen. The tree at the far edge stood as it always had, broad and patient and indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. Aaron was carrying something wrapped in dark cloth. He had not told her what it was. When they reached the center of the clearing, he unwrapped it. The crown was exactly as she remembered, heavy, angular, forged in the old way from the metals of conquered kingdoms, built to announce power rather than hold it. She had not seen it since the night she arrived at the palace gate. It looked, in the fading light, like what it was, something made for dominance, something cold. He held it out to her, not on her head, in her hands. He placed it in her hands and stepped back and waited. She looked at it for a long moment. She felt its weight, the history of it, all those edges designed to impress and intimidate. She thought of Caden. She thought of what she had told him in the dark, that his father loved him more than kingdoms. She walked to the base of the tree and set the crown down against the roots. gently, as though setting something to rest that had been carried too long. "I don't need that one," she said. She heard Aaron exhale behind her. When she turned, he was already reaching into his coat, drawing out something else. Smaller. She hadn't noticed it before, hadn't been meant to. It was a circlet, simple and fine, woven from thornwood silver in the style of living branches, set with a single pale stone at the center, the color of winter light, the color of Caden's eyes. He crossed the clearing to her. He raised both hands and placed it on her head with a care so particular, so deliberate, that she felt it travel all the way down through her. "This one was made for you," he said. His voice was very steady and very quiet. "Not for a Luna, not for a queen, for Shirley Rowland, who walked into the dark and chose love anyway." She reached up and covered his hands with hers, holding them there, holding him there, his palms warm against her hair, and the cool silver settling against her brow like something that had always belonged. They stayed until the stars came out one by one above the treeline. The forest was completely silent around them. Not the terrible silence she had known here once, that breathless, dangerous quiet. This was something different entirely. This was the silence of a held note finally resolved. The silence of a story that has found, after everything, exactly where it meant to end. She didn't let go of his hands. He didn't move. And the thornwood, for the first time in longer than anyone living could remember, was entirely at peace.